All right, going live here. Got to make sure everything is coming up. We'll start seeing some people show up on the chat. Let me make sure this is public. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm sure this is the first time I'm dropping some stuff live onto my Facebook feed, but I think it is a discussion worth talking about. A lot of you might know me. I'm Samson. A lot of people know me from Ian Chadrick's show called Sit Rep 2020. A lot of people know me from the bar industry, as a DJ. There's a lot of different things I'm sure people know me from, the paranormal field that I was involved in years ago. But there's a topic that I'm seeing kind of basically just going crazy right now. I don't know if it's because everybody's locked up in their house or what it is, but there's a lot of paranoia surrounding this topic that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to dump a lot of information on you guys and try to see if we can't straighten out what we're talking about, the dangers of this, and then its relation to things like COVID-19. So a little bit of history. I've been in the internet and TV field since 1999. So I've been doing this field for a long time, on top of some other relative things that have really kind of encompassed this electromagnetic field. When I was doing the paranormal, we ran across a lot of crazy high EMF fields that caused some really drastic symptoms. And it was a pretty well-known and studied thing that was going on. And then when I was a DJ for a long time, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are friends with me on Facebook who are also DJs who can attest to this. But when we were DJing, we had the ability to control crowds through the music that we played. I don't know if a lot of us, were fully aware of what we were doing, but I had a pretty fundamental understanding of what was happening with the music that I played. Had the ability to basically ebb and flow a crowd. I could get them from everybody hanging out at the bar to immediately coming to the dance floor to cycling back to the bar. So I used to have the ability to control a crowd, and I knew that if certain music or certain types or certain songs were played back to back to back, I would have a fight in the bar. It was just because of the hype, the influence that the frequencies that are played in the music, what it would do. This is why there is such difference in this, like the quality of music, from romantic style music, jazz, to more hype music. But you could really do a lot with controlling crowds based on the frequencies of the music they were playing. And I know a lot of DJs that if they jump in here, they would be like, oh yeah, I know this song really got people going. And I mean, even, and it was timeless. There was music that you could play to a generation that had never heard that music, but it would still have the same effect on them. So this was something I'm aware of, and this is part of what we're going to talk about when we're talking about frequencies. And this plays a lot into the whole idea of 5G, because there's a lot of misunderstanding. 5G is not just a wavelength. 5G is actually, let me pull this up here real quick so we can start talking about this. 5G is actually a technology spectrum. Not only is it a wavelength in the electromagnetic spectrum, but it is actually this shows 5. It's actually 7 different technologies that are going simultaneously, being rolled out. Some of them have been perfected, some of them haven't, but not all of them are fully rolled out or implemented. So when people are talking about 5G this, 5G that, 5G is causing this, they don't understand that 5G is not just one technology. As we go across this, I'll spell these out for you guys real quick. So the first one is millimeter waves, and we'll cover what millimeter wavelength is. The next one is called small cells. And small cells will be the more frequent thing that is being put up around cities and down streets. Massive MIMO, I'll talk about that. Beamforming is more of one of the concerns that I have with the future of this technology, and then full duplex. Two of the other that aren't listed on here are part of what I'm involved in with my current work, and that is fiber backbone, which is what, if the massive MIMO or any of that stuff is overloaded, it goes to rolls over to the fiber network, and it transfers the data from location on a fiber backbone. The other one is internal and fixed wireless. So like in-home Wi-Fi, because of the spectrum of 5G, the millimeter bandwidth, it doesn't penetrate walls very well. So it'd be great if you're sitting outside, but when you get inside, it's not so great. So a lot of the companies have instituted and gotten away from a 2.4 frequency to a 5 gigahertz frequency, which is another thing I want to talk about. There's a difference between the 5 gigahertz frequency, or the 5G Wi-Fi that you have inside of your house, versus the 5G that we're talking about when we talk about cellular service. So this is kind of the first part I wanted to talk about. So we'll talk about millimeter bandwidth and what millimeter bandwidth represents. I'll throw a couple of things up here as soon as I can find the next one here. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what frequency is and what we're talking about when we talk about wavelength. So this is a little bit an idea of what we're talking about with wavelength. So a wavelength is the gap between the ebb and flow of a wavelength. So real heavy is where you would find the AM spectrum. The actual, like when they had the AM towers that you listen to, talk radio or whatever on your radio in your car, the wavelength for that is about the length of a football field. And most people don't understand this, but this is how it travels so far, is because it has an excessively large wavelength, but it doesn't carry much data, and it's subject to a lot of interference. This is why AM band radio is scratchy, and you deal with a lot of interference and stuff. As you start progressing down this, we get into higher frequency or more closer to millimeter bandwidth. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about wavelengths. Let me find the next one here. I want to give people an idea of what we're looking at with the technology. Here's another screenshot here of the different spectrum. So 1 gigahertz, you can see the different megahertz and hertz that are in these wavelengths. A lot of people aren't going to understand this, so I'm going to show you the next one as soon as I can find it here. I don't know why this thing is not letting me change. Here we go. It was back at the very beginning. All right. Okay. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum. And when people are talking about this, the electromagnetic spectrum covers everything from magnetic fields all the way to gamma radiation. And this includes sunlight and the visible light spectrum. So when we're talking about this spectrum, a lot of people don't understand like what is all encompassed in it. It is actually a full spectrum from beginning to end. There are these massive wavelengths all the way down to the ionizing side, and I'll talk about that here in a second. If you look through here, you're going to see the different hertz in the frequencies, and then what kind of electronics or what kind of devices use this. So as you can see in here, when you're going, just kind of understand the difference between the frequencies. There's a sub frequency, there's mid, so low, mid, and high range when we're talking about these different frequencies. So you got static and electromagnetic fields. They're down here in the 0 hertz to 49 hertz. You have power that come, or the electromagnetic fields that come off of power poles. You get into TV and radio broadcasting is in here. Your 3, 4, and 5G currently are in this spectrum. This is kind of the thing that I want to talk to people about, is that people are freaking out right now and saying, oh, well, the 5G's this, they're rolling out 5G in my neighborhood. Currently, In most cases, there are a couple test cities that are trying different frequencies. They are currently running on the 4G backbone. And it's running in the 28 megahertz, if I'm correct. What they're trying to get into is the higher, that what's called the high band frequency, which is between 30 and 80 megahertz. And there's other stuff that's already in this bandwidth. But then we get into the visible light range, which this is your color spectrum, the visible light that you can see. And then you get into ultraviolet. And this is where you can see, I don't know why people don't talk about this much anymore, but we're talking about 5G cooking you and everything. When I was growing up, it used to be about ultraviolet rays, that they were going to give you cancer and you had to wear sunscreen and all this other kind of stuff. If you actually look at how close ultraviolet rays are to X-rays, you start seeing that the dangers of things like this are far more excessive than what we're talking about. There are dangers, and we're going to talk about those. But you can see as it gets into higher ranges that you get into gamma and radioactive sources. So I see Ian on there. Hey, what's going on, Ian? And I do have the chat up here. So if you guys want to throw anything in here as I'm talking, I'll try to respond. So let's go on to the next one. Okay. So this is again another one. This is where the 5G, where they're trying to get, this is where it's currently at, and they're trying to get it into the 50 to 60 to 80 megahertz range, or gigahertz range, I'm sorry. One of the things I keep seeing a lot of people talking about is that any frequency on here can be weaponized, which is actually correct. There are a lot of government weapons that are using laser technology, as well as high EMF, or they have a technology, and I'll pull up the printout from the DoD, which shows their different technology. But basically, anything on here can be weaponized if you've put enough power behind it. Anything on the frequency spectrum can be weaponized. I mean, you've got radioactive sources, you have gamma rays. All of this stuff can cause you harm depending on how much energy is put behind it. So let's start talking about some of the technology real quick, and then kind of talk about where we're at with this technology. So which one was the first one we were going to talk about? Let me pull this up. This thing is in my way. Get out of here. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about, because I'm seeing a lot, are healing frequencies real? I have heard that, yes, there were healing frequencies. I mean, biblically, there's the story of Daniel, who he was able with his what was the name of that thing? The lyre. He was able to play that and then cause the kings to his demonic influence or whatever they said it was to cease because of the music that he was playing. I definitely think that there is a spectrum of music and spectrum of sound that plays a part in that. And then there's a whole thing I could get onto when I studied into music about how there was a frequency change from what our classical music was in the 14 or 1600s. They changed the pitch, the actual frequency, to a different type of frequency. And there's actually a frequency in rock that's like called the devil's frequency. And it is just this pitch. And I couldn't tell you because it's been so long since I played a guitar or bass guitar, but there is a particular chord that is played through a lot of hardcore rock music that has a legitimate, it's an uncomfortable sound, but it's played in the background of music a lot. But I mean, we're talking about frequency, and there is a lot to that as well. I could do a whole nother video on just the music side of this, but since we're talking about the 5G frequency. So the first thing I want to talk about in that list, because I see a lot of people posting up, they're putting up 5G towers everywhere. They're putting up 5G towers everywhere. Well, a lot of this 5G towers have been there for a long time. It's just there are a lot of people now who are stuck in their homes and looking out their windows and seeing this tower up there. I relate it to the idea that you never notice a car driving around until you own one, and then your familiarity with it makes you aware from subconsciously to consciously of the vehicles. Like I bought a Ford Flex. I didn't ever see one on the road until I started driving one, and now I see them everywhere. So it's that kind of thing that until you're aware of these things, you don't really recognize them. But this is what's called a MIMO tower. Let me pull this up so that everybody knows what this is. Let's see if I can get a closer. So this is a MIMO tower. So MIMO means massive input, massive output. And what this means is that for all intents and purposes, for the last, I don't know, since we've been doing communication all the way back to everybody remembers walkie-talkies, right? So the technology for for communication, for like a walkie-talkie, where you push the button and you talk, and then you have to wait for somebody else to push the button and talk. That is how communication has worked since walkie-talkies were created. Even in your in-home Wi-Fi, a lot of people complain in my field because they have Wi-Fi issues in their home, and it's usually related to the slowest device that they have in their house. Usually they have an older legacy like laptop or computer that doesn't move very fast. So basically every device that communicates to your in-house router is communicating one at a time to send and receive data. It's happening so fast because of the advancement in technology, you wouldn't notice it until you have a device that's bogging down the network. So what they've gone around doing with MIMO, it used to be one singular one of these kind of devices that would receive hundreds of different cell phone signals and data signals or text messages or phone calls. And it was transmitting data one at a time. Like I said, we're talking milliseconds. What a MIMO system does is massive input, massive output. It has more of these like receivers and sending units than a standard cellular tower. So this isn't producing the 5G radiation that everybody thinks it is, at least not yet. What this is doing is this is sending and receiving tons and tons of different from different sources so that you're not backing up the network when you have thousands of devices connecting at the same time. So this is called a MIMO. You can look these up. I'll pull up the Wikipedia. It says in radio, multiple input, multiple output, or MIMO, is a method of multiplying the capacity of radio link using multiple transmission and receiving antennas to exploit multipath propagation. MIMO has become essential element of wireless communication standards, including IEE, which is your Wi-Fi spectrums, your WiMAX 4G, and long-term evolution 4G LTE. This is where we're at right now. So more recently, MIMO has been applied to power line communication, 3-wire installation as part of ITU gigahertz standard and home plug AV2 spectrum. All right, so this is what we're talking about. When you see these towers, is a MIMO tower. This is the hub that is going to be sending and receiving signals to what we call small cells, and also receiving, every person that drives by, these cell towers. So they had to have these funky looking towers. And I've seen a lot of people say, oh, they made them look like trees and stuff like that. Yes, they did. And a lot of that has to do with because the city or county decided that they were ugly, which they are hideous, and that they had to disguise them so that they didn't, what do they say? It's like pollute the skyline, basically. There's another term for it. But so, yes, a lot of them were covered up to look like trees and things like that. It's not because the companies that are putting them up there are trying to be deceitful. That comes later. We'll talk about that. But what it is because the city or township local governing body decided that they were ugly and they didn't want to put them up. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about with this whole system, because you'll see a lot of these around schools and firehouses and things like that. The reason is because the government owns the property that these are being put on. Schools is one of those. It is a lot more expensive for a telecommunications company to put one of these in a private land and have to pay constant, like money to somebody's private land. So what they do is they work out contracts and stuff with your local government entities, and they have free land that's not generating them any income, and they will work out with these companies to where to put these so that they can get some kind of kickback. This is one of the things with the schools and stuff that highly concerns me because of the electromagnetic radiation. They put them up high enough that they should not be affecting people at ground level, but that's been proven that there are really high radiation fields even at ground level and from a far enough distance. There hasn't been enough regulation or talk about here in just a few minutes. So the next technology, small cell towers. So I've been seeing some posts about people like this one. Well, no, it's not this one. There was one, and there's been so many facepalm moments that I've been seeing people posting stuff. It was like a picture of a little light post that had a little tiny antenna sticking off the top of it. And they were freaking out. They were like, oh, this thing's killing the tree next to it and blah, blah, blah. Look at how dead this tree is. And the funny thing is that little antenna is they're called smart lights, smart poles. And they put these up, not the 5G whatever, but they put these little smart lights up in a neighborhood, and it has a sending unit that sends out a signal and says, turn on, turn off, that kind of stuff. And this person thought it was a 5G tower, and this tree that was clearly dying from half the tree had some kind of disease and it was dying. And they were freaking out saying, this light pole was causing the tree to die. No, what they actually look like, if you see them, they look like they have coffee cans on the top of the poles, on top of the lights. It looks like this, where it has a little coffee can kind of look to it. You'll see them. This one's a lot longer. They have different, depending on who creates it. This one has the actual kind of MIMO style on it. But you'll see those. That is what they're trying to put around. And the reason why is because millimeter bandwidth in the frequency that they're wanting to work in does not travel very far. And one of the big impedances to it is trees, even rain can really distort the signal. And it may be, I think when they were testing these, they would go out about 2 blocks from before it would start disconnecting for a cell phone connected to a small cell. So they have to put these all over the place. And that's another thing that is concerning, is because of the frequency that these are going to be placed. About every 4th pole or something like that is about the distance, about every 2 blocks. So that's small cell technology. See, one of the other ones was, let me go back to main photo here. Oop. Okay, so we've covered millimeter waves, small cell, massive MIMO, beam forming. Now, this is one of them that is concerning to me, as beam forming, because as current systems work now, it looks like this. All right, it looks like this on the left here. So on current technology, it sends out signal just broadly and hits whatever it possibly can. What beamforming is coming along to do is basically like direct energy. It'll be, look at kind of like the difference between a light bulb and a flashlight. So a light bulb would be broadcasting and lighting up an entire room, while a beamforming would be like a flashlight that shoots the signal straight to the device. And this is what they're trying to work on. This is one of the 5G pieces that isn't fully implemented yet. So it's just they don't have the technology advancement to go there. But basically, imagine you walking by one of these towers, and instead of it just radiating this signal, it links to yours. It communicates through GPS in real time. And as you walk by it, the beam is pointing directly to your device and shooting this data, at a stream instead of being broadcast through everything. So the reason why they want this kind of technology is because they would want it in cities, because buildings and things like that will block this left-hand side type of radiating cell signal. So they want it to directly pinpoint the device or bounce off buildings, things like that, or ricochet off the small cell towers to get to where you're at. So this is the beam forming that they want to get to. And that to me is, I think could be really problematic with shooting a directed energy type signal directly to your device. And that gets even kind of crazier when we talk about more conspiratorial things, which I will hit on at the end of this, because I really want to get this kind of stuff out so that people have an understanding about what they're talking about before we get into the more conspiratorial stuff. So this is one of the next piece is the kind of the last piece that I wanted to talk about as far as the equipment. Where was that at? There we go. And that's full duplex. So we were talking about earlier how signal is kind of, it works like walkie-talkie. And even the current systems in your 5G router, 2.4 router in your home do this. And they wait for each device to communicate. And so sometimes it's imagine a train having to go one direction and send the signal, and then it receives that signal down the same track. Well, wavelength, millimeter, well, pretty much all frequency, it tends to, the send and receive path are on the same kind of wavelength. So what they're trying to do is the full duplex is, imagine putting a roundabout in the train tracks. So when one signal is coming in and another signal is going out, they go around each other instead of run on the same frequency. So that is another part where they are putting into the system, tied in with the MIMO, tied in with the small cell, tied in with the beamforming, where these devices will not communicate over the exact same frequency and not have to wait, because they want instantaneous like data tracking. I mean, it's crazy how fast the speeds. I think Ericsson, they just had some crazy like 400 gigabytes or something like that they could transmit in 10 seconds on this technology using the upward like 80 megahertz scale or 80 gigahertz scale of Wi-Fi. Like, I mean, it's what they're trying to do. I mean, you literally would be able to download a massive movie in 10 seconds, like in 4K quality. And that's what our technology is going towards, because with 8K resolution cameras, things like that, they use so much data and need to take up so much bandwidth that we're like this, for the way that our technology is progressing, has to go to faster speeds. What we're having now will just eventually, we will have so many devices connected, it's going to bog down the network. Emergency services will be affected, all kinds of stuff. So this is why they're pushing this kind of technology on the surface level. Now, we get into a lot of things about other crazy stuff that can come from this, and one of those being tracking. So currently, when you're say you commit a crime, they're able to take your cell phone data and they can triangulate you through 3 distant cell towers and get a general idea within blocks that you were around that location at that time. When they introduce small cell technology, it will be within feet or inches that they will be able to tell, because of the triangulation between the small cells will be so great that they will be able to tell your, and in real time, and your device, everything that you think ads are bad now on Facebook, where you look something up or you say something to Google and 2 days later your Facebook feed is saying it. Imagine real time, where you look something up in Google and you're getting pop-up ads immediately for what you're looking for. Or, I mean, it's going to be crazy, because this stuff is all going to be real time. So tracking and all of that information is going to be shared. So anytime you look something up, I mean, just imagine every dystopian future movie you've ever seen, just like Blade Runner or Demolition Man, or there was one called Mime. There was a TV series on Amazon. I think it was Amazon Prime. Yeah, it's called Altered Carbon. Like all these dystopian future type shows with these like instantaneous ads that pop up. I mean, I just watched Picard, and they like flew into this one city, and before they were even flying into this planet, it started popping up like real-time ads in front of them, like three-dimensional ads. That's what we're going towards. That would only happen in a system like this. So not only privacy an issue, tracking is an issue. The frequency is also an issue. See, how do we go about this? So I think it was around 1967, the DoD had published and tried to, they've already worked out all of this kind of stuff. There is a way with, it's called like harmonic sympathy, or harmonic or sympathetic resonance. And you see this with tuning forks, right? You can hit a tuning fork and have another tuning fork next to it, and they will resonate at the same frequency. When we start getting into millimeter bandwidth, the concerns aren't so much, at least in what I'm looking at, they aren't so much like the cancer and stuff like that. What I would be more concerned about is when you get higher up into that spectrum, is the effect that it can have on atomic structures. And we didn't even talk about the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. So the spectrum that we're currently on, all the way up to the visible light spectrum, is called non-ionizing radiation, which means that the spectrum, the frequency, does not knock the protons off the atoms. I mean, it can cause some serious damage to the atom structure. When you get into UV, like ultraviolet light spectrum, ultraviolet radiation, when you get into gamma radiation, when you get into X-rays, those are serious dangers. We're not even into that yet. You have to go through the light spectrum before you get into that. But I think people are really scared because of the whole term radiation. I've discussed this at length a couple different times, and I think our biggest thing that we run across, if you think about it, we didn't start really getting into the whole like fear panic mode for radiation until after World War II. The whole atomic energy thing that kind of flourished. I mean, there was a lot of people, like stuff before, if you had any of the green glass or green painted ceramic pre like 1940, all of that was like ionized radiation. Like those things actually, like people would eat off those and they would get sick from them, because that was just, they were using, I can't remember what was it? Uranium or something like that. They were painted with like a uranium enriched. That's how they got the green color to it, like this jade glass and jade colored paint. But pretty much anything that was like painted green up to that point was used as some kind of radiation. And then people didn't really freak out about it. But after we dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the kind of reality about what radiation can do really kind of set into people. But we get the term radio from radiation because it's on the same spectrum. So we have this idea that all of this stuff is under the same radio, like electromagnetic radiation. So it's all of this stuff is in this field, everything from EMF, magnetic and positive and negative magnetic charges. All of this stuff is in the same spectrum: UV light, ultraviolet light, infrared light, gamma rays, X-rays, your microwave, your cell phone, your lights inside of your home. All of these things emit something on this form or on this spectrum. It's just because it's tied with the term radiation that people really start to freak out. And not that there isn't some cause. I think anytime you're dealing with high EMF or you're dealing with something that has a high radiation or ionizing or non-ionizing radiation, there are dangers. So non-ionizing radiation may not knock, protons from your atoms, but they do cause intense heat the closer you are to it. There are dangers. If you get up on a cell phone tower, there are dangers and signs posted all over the place that tell you don't, get in front of these beams. They will like microwave you, like literally, because the heat that is produced in front of them. And I've seen a lot of people posting things about birds and stuff like that. There could have been a malfunction in a tower and it just nuked everything in the sky. I have no idea. But I do know that there are dangers. I have a friend of mine that was telling me about one of his experiences on working on one of the older systems. I'm talking about like a 1G the first generation kind of cell towers, and he slipped, and these things look like big drums, and he grabbed the front part of it just with the tip of his fingers, and it nuked the tip of his fingers. And 10 years later, he still has yellow tips of his fingers because of how bad it damaged the tips of his. It's like literally microwaved his fingers. So there are dangers to any of these first generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation. Your microwave in your house, if you go outside and sit in the sun too long, there are dangers. If you go in and you're an x-ray technician and you don't wear, what is it? What am I thinking of? Oh man, lead. Sorry. I got so many things going on here. If you don't wear lead to protect you, I mean, there are some serious repercussions that can happen. Gamma radiation. If you guys ever watched the Chernobyl show on Amazon Prime, you can the firefighters and stuff are running out there trying to clean up ionized, like gamma radiated pieces of rock and stuff with no protection whatsoever, and they were dying like within the day. So we were talking, we said any of this stuff on this frequency, the amount of power and the frequency that the frequency isn't as problematic as the amount of power behind it or the amount of exposure. And like I said, when we get into small cell technology where the stuff is being reproduced and it's everywhere, that could be problematic. I don't think there's enough. I've looked into a lot of the studies, and there were two major studies. One of them came out of Italy, and the other one was at a college or university somewhere. And basically they took male rats and they basically just like nuked them with millimeter bandwidth. High amounts of it that nobody should be exposed to. And they started growing tumors and cancerous cells. But that can be argued both ways. And I don't think that's enough evidence to prove, the safety, the distance. We really need some serious regulation and some serious investigation into this, because there's so much that can happen with this. But the things that I'm really concerned with, we were talking about when I was DJing and stuff, about how frequency can be used to sway people. And so one of the things that I'm really concerned with is what's called harmonic sympathy or sympathy resonance. Well, I was kind of backtrack a little bit here where we're talking about tuning forks, right? So in this spectrum, you can start hitting in the 60 megahertz to 80 megahertz. You can start hitting frequencies that the brain and the body run on. And with these being tuned, it can really cause some crazy things to happen. Like I said, the DoD in 1967 had already experimented with this kind of stuff. So I can only imagine in 60 years how far in advance it's come. But what they were doing was being able to change behavioral patterns with people based on the frequencies they were kind of shooting at them. Where they could literally make you kind of panicky. They could make you docile. Where you're confused there. Just probably no end to the kind of maybe more aggressive, but they would be able to do this by matching, the frequencies in the brain, because our brain runs on frequencies as well. And being able to adjust. There were patents out that people, I think it was in early 2000s, about a patent that a guy had basically produced that your computer monitor, the old style, not really the flat screens, but the old style, how he was able to, from another computer, send signal through subconsciously to somebody, and through the EMF fields that old, the big honky old computer screens, were the EMF fields that produced, they were able to change the behavioral patterns of people just by sending them subliminal signaling. So this stuff has probably been really more far advanced than what it was 60 years ago. So this is one of the things that really concerns me with this kind of technology, is the ability to beamform, shoot direct signals to certain people, and maybe change their yes, Ian, exactly, kind of like the voice of God tech. If anybody isn't familiar with that, it was something that we used over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they basically told they shot this kind of technology out to people who were Islamic. They were shot messages saying that it was Allah speaking to them and they need to put their weapons down. And, for most of them, it's the first time they'd ever heard from Allah. And so they followed suit. This is what they call voice to skull technology. And they can do that from a distance. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. So when we talk about beamforming and the small cell, they'll be able to track your location, pinpoint you or your device, depending on what kind of tech we get into in the future, whether it be an RFID chip or brain mesh, like Elon Musk talks about. Whatever kind of technology they're going to go into, the biohuman tech is what's coming, where they're integrating computer technology into the human body. And if you think about it, 60 years ago, if you committed a crime, if you did something, if you wanted to disappear, it was real easy to do. Now they can track every movement. Wherever you're at. We're seeing this with the whole COVID-19 thing, where people are releasing information saying, hey, we're able to see all the people that left from a beach in Florida and where they traveled all over the United States and could have possibly infected people with COVID-19. And this is becoming more mainstream, more normal, that they can utilize this technology to follow you and see what you do. And I don't know, like myself, I turn off my Google location services, but every single time that I update my phone, it turns it right back on. So this is something they want everyone to have. They want to track your location, where you're going. And this is something that we are already seeing. Anybody that's followed anything going on in China before all this COVID-19 stuff, they were pushing consistently this new form of technology where they had like millions and millions of camera systems set up over their major cities, and they instituted what's called a social credit score. And basically these cameras, along with people in the neighborhood who they had a job to basically send in 10 kind of good things or bad things that people did in the neighborhood. And these things were broadcast on screen. So if you jaywalked, your picture, your information about you was broadcast on a screen or put on a billboard in the city or in the town, and you were basically shamed. But it went way further than that. Your credit score, you started at like 1,000 points, and depending on what you did, and they were all there was different cities had different kind of layouts, but this was general. You started out and you were given a basic number, and then depending on the good things you did versus the bad things you did, your score went up or down. Now, that sounds on the surface like, hey, that's not so bad, right? It'd get people to kind of behave and whatnot. Well, that's what a lot of people in China thought too, until you had a dissenting thought about your government, or you had friends who didn't fall in line with the thought process that was being pushed. So with this credit score, if you had a friend who maybe said something on Facebook or their social media, and his score went down, and because you were associated with him, your score went down. And it's amazing because I saw this came out a couple years ago on a Black Mirror episode, where a girl starts out with a great credit score and she just has a bad day. She's trying to get to her friend's wedding. And by the time she gets there, with all the chaos that happens and her credit score dropping, she can't get there. She can't buy a car, or she can't rent a car. She can't fly on a plane. She misses her flight. It just, this one day, like her score went from being good quality all the way down to trash, and she was basically outcast from society. Well, this was happening in China. People were, if they said something negative about the government, or they had a complaint, or they were in the media and they didn't toe the line, well, they were basically outcast from society. The punishments for low score: you can't get loans, you can't rent a home or buy a house, you can't ride on the bus or the train system, and you can't get flights out of China. You basically become an outcast of society. And then you're blacklisted from pretty much anything. And I don't even know if it's possible for you to recover from that once you're blacklisted. Like China, the CCP was bragging about being able to block millions and millions of people from their travel and flights and things like that, because they didn't fall in line with the communist propaganda of China. So, this is kind of one of those things that I see is needed. This technology is needed to push this same agenda. So one of the things that, like, the reason why I'm coming on here is because I want people to direct their focus, right? There's a lot of people out there who are saying, oh, 5G is causing COVID. So let's get to the elephant in the room, right? So a lot of the information I've tried to pour through as much of it as I can is speculative at best, that has anything relative to do with COVID, because correlation does not equal causation. So just because the cities where they rolled out 5G is the same as the hotbeds for coronavirus does not mean that they correlate enough to say that one caused the other. If we think about it logically, a telecommunications company is not going to spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on infrastructure and 5G and putting up towers, putting up small cells, getting into all of the cost and manpower and technology to do massive MIMO beamforming, the full duplex. They're not going to spend or waste all of that amount of time just for rural Utah, right? They're going to get their biggest bang for their buck in the same major cities that we're talking about. Of course, these are hotbeds for people, and this is where they're going to kind of, have the same locations. One of the first cities to roll out 5G was Waco, Texas, and they had a full city of 5G ready to go. Did we see like a massive boom of people dying from COVID-19 in Waco, Texas? No. I mean, there are in my city alone, they did in Speedway, Indiana, Verizon did a rollout of 5G. Did we see a massive amount? No. We saw our first cases break out in Avon, Indiana, out in the middle of nowhere. So, I mean, like I said, correlation does not equal causation. Okay. The reason why you see them in the same places is because that's where the most of the people are at. Okay. I could say that if you looked at it, all the cities that had the major breakouts, they're primarily liberal cities. Does that mean that this is God's punishment to liberals? Correlation does not equal causation. Okay. So we have to understand when we're going to argue this topic. Okay. If this comes to your city, if this comes to your town or whatever, and you guys don't feel like it's good for your township, your school system, to have one of those MIMO towers in the back of your school, which I completely agree with, then going in front of the city council and telling them that you think it causes COVID-19 is just going to get you laughed out of there. There's no serious science to back any of that up. So I think this is what the disinformation is that people are throwing this thing around because it makes us truthers look stupid. And I really want to reach out to people and get people's attention to understand that there are serious implications to this technology that goes far beyond COVID-19, right? But if we concentrate on this thing that's so absurd and keep passing that around, you just look crazy. And nobody's going to take you seriously. So when they actually roll it out in your city, and everyone who's going to go to, the city council meeting and going to protest it or talking about it causing COVID-19, they're going to laugh you right out of the building, and they're going to put it up without your care. So this is kind of what I really want to reach out to people. There are dangers of high EMF fields, beamforming technology where it can shoot a concentrated beam of this at your body. There are some serious implications, some serious things that can happen from this. But this technology is going to get pushed whether we like it or not. That's the truth, is because the way that we're moving with technology, if we don't keep up with this tech, I mean, we're going to see serious implications where you're not going to be able to call 911 services, because it's backed up, or the network's going to crash or whatever. So this technology is going to be pushed. And it's going to come out, and it's going to roll out whether people like it or not. I mean, if people think that they can get it stopped in their town or their city, I mean, go for it. Try to do what you can. But like I said, my biggest thing is there are greater issues at hand with this technology than just, 5G correlation with COVID-19. There are, even with COVID-19, I could go into all kinds of stuff about causation with that, and all kinds of, things that are being pushed with that alone. But it's not the same as what we're talking about now. Don't get caught up in that. If we're going to concentrate on trying to overcome and get more regulation, get more testing, we're not putting these things up in everybody's backyard, then we really need to concentrate on that and not sound silly talking about things that have no actual science behind them. And there was legitimate science for cancer with the 5G and the high EMF and the high spectrum of this. there's no science to the 5G and coronavirus. The closest I found, I'll give some credibility out there. The closest I found was lung damage caused by radiation. They have very similar symptoms. The problem is, what people don't understand is, let me go back here, is the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Okay, so when they're talking about high radiation from radiation chemo treatments, things like that, we're talking about ionizing radiation. You see the spectrum right here? That's ionizing radiation. That will damage your lungs. That has the potential to do all kinds of things. But 5G is in the non-ionizing side, which the worst that it can do is get hot. That's where your microwave's at, is in these areas, right? Then it's just no different than when you stand out in the sun and you get hot, right? Non-ionizing radiation causes heat. Ionizing radiation causes damage and destruction to atoms. It separates the atoms from their protons, the protons from the neutrons, sorry. So there is a huge difference, okay? And we have to understand that. If you take 5 minutes to actually look into the science, you'll understand a little bit more about these different things. And I just don't want people to sound stupid. I really want people, if you're going to battle this, you're going to take this on, running around saying that 5G causes COVID-19 is just going to be laughable, especially with the way people are reacting to this. I mean, you're going to find people are going to agree with you in your small echo chamber, but out in the real world, people are going to, this is going to be a traumatic experience for people. This will be remembered like 9/11. And this is going to be something that people will always think back on. And, just like people used to tear at, not when you're running around saying 5G causes COVID-19. And nobody's going to take you seriously. So like I said, concentrate on the legitimate science for it, concentrate on the real dangers for this. Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility for that, Andrew. Andrew said, so are you in agreement that 5G EMF interacts with heavy metals from all the chemtrails which we breathe and absorb into our bodies? I think there's definitely a possibility for that. I mean, there's enough evidence that they are putting barium and aluminum up in the skies, and you just stick some aluminum in your microwave and see how that works. But again, we're talking about completely different things in the spectrum, but it still can't be good for you. I mean, we weren't built for this kind of tech. I mean, it just is what it is. So when we're getting into these frequencies and stuff, anything excessive or anything, at high frequency, at high power, it can be potentially dangerous. Just like I said, I mean, if you stay out in the sun too long, it increases your risk for cancer. If you you get too many medical x-rays, you can have problems. If you're, swallowing uranium or gamma radiation, it's going to cause you problems. Well, that's no different than the rest of the technology. If you stand in front of one of these towers, you're going to have, some problems. It's going to, be really hot. It's not going to feel good. Yeah, I wanted to touch on just one final thing, because we were talking about the frequency, right? So let's see if I can find this, because we did bring up that any of this technology can be weaponized. So I'll probably try to link this, because this was something that I found as a PDF document from the Congressional Research Service, from the DoD, just some government information about weapons that come out of the electromagnetic spectrum. And as we scroll through here, you'll kind of see, so they're showing the electromagnetic spectrum in the visible light range, where the frequencies are. And these are going to be talking about direct energy weapons that the government has already implemented and utilized. So it's DE weapons international agreements. That's something else I had to talk. Was going to talk about was the approval of the spectrums. They have to go through the U.S. government and also the UN for you to utilize any part of the spectrum. So telecommunication companies aren't going to be all willy-nilly grabbing any kind of spectrum they can. They have to be approved through the FCC and the UNTI, I think. I'll pull that up in just a second. But as I scroll through here, I want to show you the pictures. Okay, so this is the tactical high energy laser. So just like I said, in the visible light range spectrum and the UV spectrum, there are, like I said, you can weaponize any part of this frequency. Okay, this is a like high energy, direct energy laser that they can shoot at and target missiles and basically shoot heat at it and destroys them in the air, planes, missiles, that kind of stuff. So the light range can be weaponized. As we scroll down here, this is called the active denial system. This was rolled out in Iraq and Iran. And what this thing does, it looks like a giant radar dish because that's what it is. It shoots radio waves in the spectrums we're talking about with a lot of power behind them. And what it does, like we said, with this non-ionizing radiation, what does it produce? Heat. So what do the people feel that are on the other end of this thing? They feel really hot. And so what it would be is if a group of people congregated or were trying to riot or whatever, they plop one of these things in front of them, they shoot this beam, and they feel uncomfortably hot and run away. That's what the active denial system is, or ADS. As we keep scrolling down here, you have the prototype for Max Power System. So this is another direct energy initiative, high energy laser tactical equipment. So, I mean, there are weapons, and these are some more of the scopes of the high energy laser in a vehicle. So yeah, these are legitimate things that we're talking about. Yes, every single one and every single part of this frequency can be weaponized. Yes, it can. And the government has already blocked off its own sections of those frequencies that no one else can utilize. Currently, right now, the 60 gigahertz, I keep seeing this 60 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz over and over and over again. Right now in the spectrum, 60 gigahertz is not licensed to anybody. So the people that keep dropping this information about, oh, well, they're going to put 60 gigahertz in here, it's going to microwave your skin and boil your testicles and whatever. Nobody is licensed to use 60 gigahertz. Currently, we are running on 24 gigahertz on the cell backbone of like, say, for instance, AT&T. If you look at your phone and you're on an AT&T network in a major city, it says 5GE, which means 5G evolution. It's a marketing ploy by AT&T that says they are evolving into this 5G technology. Verizon, they pushed out a lot of 5G tech, but they are not full spectrum like we've talked about with all 7 different applications rolled out. Which again, got to remember where I put that at. That was in the photos. Oop. Oh, come on. Of course, this would be where is the arrow? Oh, live programming. Let's see here. I'll just swipe it and that works better. Okay. So yeah, so none of them currently have all 5 of these systems. Like I said, all 7 altogether, which is a fiber backbone and then internal home Wi-Fi to cover the 5G that can't penetrate through your house. So, yeah, so I mean, I pretty much covered all of that. The last kind of things I wanted to talk about when I said, let's see, I saved these. So it's International Telecommunications Unit, our union, is who the international community has to go through for any kind of spectrum use, the FCC in the United States. So to function or utilize any part of this spectrum that we're talking about, the government has its own blocks that it uses for emergency broadcast, for air traffic control. All of these things are highly regulated. Anybody who's ever been a ham radio operator, or anybody who's worked in the same field that I do, we used to, back in the day before digital technologies, used to have to walk around or drive around cities looking for RF leakage, because the FCC would do flyovers, because the RF signals that we were running to power your TV back before we had digital set-top boxes would interfere with flight traffic control. So the FCC would fine these cable companies millions of dollars if they flew over and there was too much leakage. So all of this stuff is regulated. And like I said, I keep seeing this whole thing with 60 gigahertz and blah, blah, blah. There's more than enough evidence out there. I mean, I could pull up all kinds of slides that show the 60 gigahertz frequency is not being utilized by anybody right now. It's considered unlicensed. So I haven't found anything that correlates with COVID-19 and 60 gigahertz, but we're not even working in it. So what does it matter? So the highest that I've seen so far is 28 gigahertz. And the government is actually selling off like 30 through 48. And then on the other side of 60 gigahertz up to 80. So I don't know who's purchased what. I don't have access to all of that. I'm sure I could probably find it if I dug hard enough, but each one of those is going to be licensed to a particular group. But I haven't seen, I mean, the 60 gigahertz frequency that I've seen right now isn't licensed to anybody. So I don't know where some of this stuff is coming from. So I just want everybody to be cautious. I mean, it's like, this has taken me almost an hour. I'm about to finish up. This has taken me almost an hour to cover all of this. It's a lot easier to share a meme on Facebook or share, a YouTube video and not have any clue of what you're talking about and be misrepresenting or spreading disinformation than it is to sit here and spend an hour and countless hours upon hours of studying to actually figure out what, the truth is. So I wanted to compile as much as I could together for everybody as quickly as I could. And I'll try to answer any other questions at a later point. But I just want people to understand, and I want people to kind of figure this out. So, we don't sound crazy. Like, there's actually science behind all this stuff, and there are actual legitimate concerns, and we need to be focusing on that and not off these crazy rabbit trails. And this is coming from somebody who was a pre 9/11 conspiracy theorist. I'm huge into conspiracy theories. And I mean, I spend a lot of time studying all this kind of stuff and delving deep in, but there's a difference between taking somebody who is a conspiracy theorist legitimately because they have the facts, they have the truth, they have the knowledge, and then taking somebody not serious because they just sound like a wacko Karen and just throwing out information that has no scientific basis, has no reality. So I just want to kind of throw my 2 cents in and put that out there. So I thank you guys for listening. And if you want to see more of our content, always check out the Holy Hand Grenade on YouTube. And check out our sit rep videos where we talk about a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of current topics. But right now, I don't know, guys. I know a lot of people are celebrating Passover tonight. So have a blessed Passover. If you're doing it tonight, if you're doing it tomorrow, have a blessed Passover tomorrow. The rest of you guys have a good Easter. And I love each and every one of you guys. And I will talk to you all soon.